Shelley, thank you so much for taking this time. Um, I loved what you said about the root of the word zuz, or a coin, coming from the Hebrew word meaning movement. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about what you think is significant about that.
Yeah, I think it's very significant because it tells us something about the nature of money. And if we can understand more about the essence of what money is and what it represents in the world and its true nature, and I think that helps us in a lot of ways, particularly as we think about tzedakah and I think about philanthropy.
It made me think that it really
Money.
drives home this idea that wealth isn't really a permanent part of us, the idea that it moves.
Right. If you think about the fact that money moves constantly and it moves in a number of ways. So one, it moves from person to person. So we're very accustomed to talking about circulation
Mm-hmm.
of currency, for example. So it's moving between individuals. It's also moving in terms of its relative value. So for example, we know that on any given day, the number of dollars in a shekel or the number of
Mm-hmm.
shekels in a euro is constantly changing. So it's moving in a relative way as well. Then we also know that money moves in the context of markets, and it actually ebbs and flows kind of like tide.
Mm-hmm.
It flows into a market, it flows out of a market, and it has that type of movement as well. I think the implication for that, as we think about philanthropy and we think about tzedakah, is that we should not expect money to be static. That as much as we are, on one level, understanding that things are constantly changing, I think we have this other desire or expectation that things stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they don't. And I think it can also tell us that just as we have so many other opportunities to experience moments of everyday holiness in our lives, that if we bring kind of consciousness to ourselves as both the generators of movement for money in different ways and the recipients of movement for money in different ways, then just as other moments in our lives can become opportunities to connect with God and experience holiness, money has that potential as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The other thing that really struck me in what you
Okay.
so you reflected on the Midrash saying that just as we need to rebalance our investment portfolios from time to time, that the Midrash also really challenges us to think about how we allocate other assets. And I'm wondering what process that might be. What might that look like to rebalance how we allocate all of our assets?
This is a wonderful question, and it's a process that I have gone through myself
Hmm.
in recent years. So I appreciate the opportunity to think a little bit about what the process was like for me and what it could be like for other people. I think the first step is that we have to understand in a different way what our assets are. So in the financial world, when we think of a portfolio, we're accustomed to talking about stocks and bonds and real estate and these different categories or classes of assets. But I think if we look more holistically at our lives and ourselves as the study of Talmud and Torah encourages us to do, then our categories of assets might include things like our time, our talents, our skills, our expertise, our relationships with friends, family, community, colleagues, and our financial assets. And if we take the time, first of all, to think about what our assets are, see all the gifts that we have been given, and then also to think closely about what we have not assembled in our portfolio, that's a good place to start. And then I think the second step is once we know what our assets are, we should decide what our values and our goals are for each asset category. So in the financial world, there's a wonderful term called IRR, which stands for internal rate of return. And it's a formula that's calculated in the investment world to express the return of investments over a period of time. So I like to think of the internal rate of return in a slightly different way and to say, what is our relationship to ourselves? What is our relationship to others? And what is our relationship to God? And if we then use that as the avenue to say, and therefore, what is the return on the investment that we're looking for in our time, in our talents and skills, our relationships, and our financial resources, it leads to a very different kind of exploration. And then the third step is really to rebalance the personal portfolio so that you're investing your total assets and not just your financial assets. I found this to be a very meaningful process. You ask a different set of questions and it can lead you to some very different answers.
Thank you. I really appreciate your reflections.